is the opening up of foreign ownership and control to cultural industries, particularly in telecom and through telecom to broadcasting and other sectors as well. This document today, if you do a search for the word culture, you will come as a component of agriculture and aquaculture. The word culture appears only once at this moment. The official position of the government is cultural exemption, but the introduction of a Chapter 11 and the opening up of foreign ownership, particularly through telecom, is something that is of great concern to the cultural sector.
Okay, the first question as to the dominance of the European Union. First, it's just simple weight. They are by far the larger party. But in the study which is available today, Dylan can provide you with copies, I discussed some of the history, the background to these negotiations. And Canada is very much the demandeur in these negotiations. There were previous negotiations that failed in 2005. And the European Commission in particular was very reluctant to engage in these negotiations, but Canada essentially came on bended knee and promised, among other things, provincial compliance and full implementation of all areas of this treaty. So the Commission could, whereas this is a centerpiece of the current government's foreign economic policy, I think the Europeans could walk away at any moment without any domestic political repercussions. And you could see that in their demands, which are unreasonable and extreme, whether it's to do with intellectual property or procurement. At the sub-national level, Canada has, with the exception of the recent agreement over Buy America with the United States, considerable policy flexibility at the level of procurement. So this would go well beyond WTO or NAFTA. And in other areas, such as investment or services, I mean, the negotiators have explicitly set themselves a target of a highly ambitious treaty, which is NAFTA and WTO plus. And as you alluded to, any concessions made to European investors or service providers in this agreement would then have to be extended to U.S. service providers or investors under the most favored nation treaty provisions of the NAFTA.
In many respects, this goes much farther than WTO and NAFTA. The provisions are much more draconian. The powers that they would give are similar to the multilateral agreement on investment, and particularly around intellectual property from an agriculture perspective. Ultimately, they're imposing conditions, for instance, control on the rights to save and reuse seed for farmers, which are fundamental to agriculture. The intellectual property provisions would allow, for example, those holding those plant breeders' rights or patents on seeds, the right for preemptive seizure of immovable and movable property and the freezing of bank accounts of suspected infringers. Now, this goes way beyond any purview of in any trade agreement. And what that would mean for farmers in particular is, for example, if they found their crop to be contaminated with a patented or protected variety, they could be accused of infringing. They could have their equipment, their crops, their farms seized, and their bank accounts frozen in order to assure these very monopoly biotech companies, grain companies, or others, to make sure that they are adequately compensated in case a decision goes against them. So it goes far beyond the scope of even the WTO, and even the PBR legislation that's required in this agreement goes beyond what our international commitments are at the WTO and PBR's plant breeders' rights. And that translates back into the cultural areas too, into copyright, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that the opening up of trade for Canadians, like beef, or for example the issue around biotech Canadian crops getting into Europe. In Appendix 1B in the sanitary and phytosanitary chapter, they exempt all European GM regulations from this agreement. So the reality is that there are almost no advantages for Canadians in terms of opening up trade, but there's an awful lot of advantages for those huge monopoly corporate players to protect their interests and to extend their control through a series of measures that really will change the face of, at least for Canadian farmers, of agriculture and how they conduct it, and of course for the cultural industries, for labor, etc. It's all about not trade, but altering who dominates how policy is constructed in Canada.
So here in Canada, the Postal Service is regulated because Canada Post has the exclusive privilege for the letter. But what you see in Europe now, it's all deregulated, and in January 2011, all the sector will be deregulated. So what they want with this service is really full access to all the services and all the market around postal services. And in some ways, there will be like a regulatory body, but this regulatory body would just open the door. And I'm sure you remember the suit that United Parcel Service for $200 million around the NAFTA. And that's something important because you open the market, and big corporations like TNT, about the service, DHL, and all these European are coming in and will take the service. And one thing they really want is to deregulate the international mail. And that's a big debate here because in some ways, if you open and the market is deregulated, in some ways, what will happen with our postal service? We are a large country, 33 million people, and we have the universal service and the exclusive privilege with protecting the servicing and the job. And that's something important because if you can remember, us as union, we've always been against all the free trade agreement, FTA, NAFTA. We're against this one because it's always the issue at the end is job. It's people negotiating behind doors around the issue for big corporations that they have access to everybody, to everything, but at the end, who's doing the day-to-day job? It's our worker. And in some way, we have to be involved and we have to protect this job. It's why we signed this really trade justice agreement. It's something important for the workers that we have an open debate on all these issues.